Happy Monday, founders. It is going to be such a great show. We'll get into why in a second. But first, I want to ask the question, have you ever felt like the rules of business just keep changing when you think you've mastered the game? In 1911, a little-known businessman named Alfred P. Sloan took over a struggling ball bearing company. It's all about ball bearings. Very few of you guys are going to get that joke. Maybe our guest will. I'm not sure. Probably too young. Instead of trying to do everything himself, he implemented a revolutionary management system to let him scale beyond his personal limitations. The system later helped him transform General Motors from mere bankruptcy into the world's largest corporation. His secret? A systematic approach to evolving from hands-on operator to true business leader. Today, on How to Founder, we're talking about Founder's evolution from doer to leader. I'm Chris Franks, and the reason why this show is so much better looking today is because Anthony Franco is at a birthday party with like a night. All I know is it's a birthday party of somebody that's over 90 years old. We're joined today by Scott Ritzheimer. Scott is the founder of Scale Architects, has helped launch nearly 20,000 businesses before 35. Hold on. I just skipped over like 20,000 businesses. That's crazy. Before 35, he and his partner built a multi-million-dollar company with 10 plus years of double-digit growth. Now he helps CEOs find their essential strategy for reaching predictable success. Scott, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Would you say that this show is like way better without Anthony, or just way better?
Yeah, there's so many threads to pick up on in that introduction. From I missed the reference, but I went straight to swordfish. You know, it was all about the ball bearings in that one too, in a very different way. So I mean, where can you go wrong with a Chris and a Scott? I mean, it's just
that's
something good
exactly
here.
Right.
Yeah,
all right, so Scott, just to kick it off, just to get it started, why does this evolution matter? I mean, why should I even consider this? What is the importance of this conversation today for me as a founder?
Yeah, there's lots of different ways to answer that question, but I would say one of the most compelling ones is for the vast majority of founders that I work with, we sit down, we kind of take an inventory of what they're spending their time on, what they should be spending their time on, and average across all of them is about 60% of what they're spending their time on right now, they shouldn't be spending their time on. And these are smart, successful people, right? And so the question is, how do we get to that point? How do we get to where the majority of what they spend their week on is not what they should be spending their week on? And the way that happens is because what you should be spending your week on, what you should be doing, what you should be focusing on, how you'll create the success that you want as founder, CEO, entrepreneur in your business is not the same as it was probably 6 months ago. And it's definitely not the same as it was 6 years ago. And so what happens is we grow by addition, right? And we think that we can do the same thing with our calendar. We think we can do the same thing with our task list. We can just add more and more and more. And to some extent, for some period of time, that's true until it isn't. And so the biggest thing that I want folks to know, and really the passion behind the book when I wrote it, was to help folks to identify maybe the 2 or 3 things that are essential for what they do, so that they can say no to the 20 or 30 things that they're giving their time, money, and attention to, and it's not creating the return that it should.
It's a phenomenal point. And it's something that it's just, I've struggled with it. I know other founders struggle with it, which is the thing that got you to the point becomes a pattern, just becomes a habit. And the job to be done might be very different at a second or third or fourth stage of the company. Those things are always evident in retrospect too. But like those gates, like, oh well, this is a different version of the company now. But
Yeah.
in those early days, it just starts to be this thing where if I am really comfortable doing, let's say, the accounting or something, I'm just going to keep doing the accounting. And then
Yeah.
to your point, just add on more tasks.
Yeah.
Problem is that you do start to run out of time, and you start to run out of energy and attention. And ultimately, you start to be the thing that gets in the way of your growth, I think. I mean, that's
Yes.
certainly happened to me. Have you seen that?
Yeah. All the time, all the time. And again, it's not so much that those things were always the wrong thing. And another interesting thing is what we have to also talk about is what we count as tasks, right? Because a lot of folks would hear that statement and say, no, there's a whole lot of things I got off of my plate. I don't do any of those things. They've handed them off to somebody else, but then they're constantly following up on them, or they're changing how they do it, or they're tweaking it. And so they're really not letting go of this stuff. It's still just kind of lingering out there. And anytime that they do get back, they backfill with all this other stuff. And so it may be that the volume of tasks has gone down, like individual tasks, but the volume of work has gone up. And if you don't wrestle that formula to the ground, it just gets harder and harder and harder. And so the other thing that happens here that leads to this problem, and why I have so much, for lack of a better term, compassion on founders who are stuck in it, is that these stages are not visible, right? That they're not like clearly demarcated. It's not like you're crossing the state line. It says "Welcome to Georgia."
Right.
They're invisible, and what I mean by that, let's take an employee's journey just as a contrast. You start out, you get hired. That's a new role, right? You're brand new to the role. You do well, you maybe get promoted to some kind of frontline supervisor, and that's a new role. Now, moving from individual contributor to frontline supervisor is actually a pretty big challenge. There are entire books, there's industries of coaching that are just dedicated to that one thing. And an employee has the advantage of recognizing, oh, that's hard because it's different. It's a new role. It's a new position. It's a new title. Hopefully, it's a new paycheck. When does that same change happen for a founder? Right?
Yeah,
When
it's
does your
you don't know, right?
when
There's
do yeah,
no
title
line of
change?
demarcation of like, oh, I have a
No.
different job title.
Yeah, is it when you hire your first VA? Is it when you hire your 15th employee? Is it when you're just so sick of everybody else around you that you find yourself waking up on Monday mornings thinking, what's wrong with these people? Like, when does it actually happen?
Yeah.
And so again, founders are clever folks, right? They might not all be super IQ smart, although many of them are, but they are smart. Like that, they figure stuff out. But how do you figure it out if you can't see it? How do you figure it out if you don't even know that it exists, right? And so we don't know that these lines exist. They're invisible. And what I've set out to do is to make those lines visible so that you know what to look for. You know when the game is changing, and you know how to evolve when it does.
So, I mean, let's get into it. So one more question, then I want to ask, more the tacticals. How do I start to realize those things? Is that the knowledge of when and why I should start to change and evolve. I've seen founders that are really good at saying like, okay, I know the job to be done is changing. I know that there's a next phase, et cetera. And so just talking for a second about the willingness to kind of embrace what is the founder's journey or the CEO's journey, like this notion that it is not going to be the same job that you started with. And next year, it's not going to be the same job. I know it's such a, to your point, such a weird job because it's not one thing. It's going to be different.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things to that. The first one is what got you here won't get you there, right? You mentioned that earlier. And it's very much the case of what's happening here. The problem with that is, how do you know which is which, right? How do you know what are the things that you've done that got you here but won't get you there versus the things that got you here that have to stay true, otherwise you won't get there, right? Because it's not that we're throwing everything away. There are lots of changes, but there's lots of things that stay the same, right? You're not changing your name, at least in the process. Hopefully not.
Hopefully,
So,
right.
it would be easier if everything changed, right? But it doesn't. There are some things that have to stay the same, some things that have to change. And so it leaves us in this kind of like guess and check approach, right? I guess I should do that. And again, that's why it's safer to add than it is to subtract. Because if you subtract the wrong thing and your business dies, it's like, well, this was not a great experiment. And so again, it's this idea that even if we recognize that some things have to change, if we don't know what the specific things are, then we've got the perfect recipe for being overworked and underwhelmed in the results.
It's such a profound point. Like just what you just said, we add stuff because we're afraid to give it up. There's an element of control, but there's a huge element of fear underlying that, which is just like, if I give up this thing, it goes horribly wrong. And so it leads to the next obvious question. Okay, so now I'm starting to evolve. First of all, how do I notice those lines of demarcation? How do I notice that the job to be done is changing and that I need to change along the way? What are the steps that you recommend?
Yeah. So the first one, and this is kind of the easy version, is we've got a site that'll tell you what, a quiz on our site that'll tell you what stage you're in. It's free.
Nice.
Everyone can use it. If you go to scalearchitects.com/founders/quiz, or even just /founders, you'll find it. We can get that in the show notes. Easy button. It'll take you 10 minutes. It's really cool. So short of that, if you want to do the, like, I want to figure this out on my own thing, awesome. There's a question that resonates in every single one of the stages. So the first two, just quickly, so that we can kind of dial in on 3, 4, 5, where most folks tend to get stuck. The first one is, isn't there a better way? Right? Stage one is what I call the dissatisfied employee. We're off, you're working somewhere else.
Right.
Yeah. And it's just like, there's gotta be a better way. Right? That's like the resounding theme in our life. Even if you can't give voice to it, as soon as you hear that, you're like, yes, that's exactly it. There has to be a better way.
Right.
So that's what really drives entrepreneurs to start. It's not money. It's not even autonomy necessarily. It's the autonomy to find and prove the better way. It's very, very cool. So it drives us. We get in the game. Stage 2 is what I call the startup entrepreneur. And the defining question you want to know if you're in stage 2 is what was I thinking? Because it's like, it's hard. Like, being an entrepreneur is really, really tough. It is not sipping, pina colada, singing Garth Brooks songs on the beach. Like it's not a 4-hour job. It's a 40-hour job a day, it seems like. And so it's really, really tough, but it's worth it, right? It's like, what was I thinking? I got this. What was I thinking? I got this. It's just this kind of vacillation that we do. So what happens in this stage, the startup entrepreneur stage, if you're successful enough, what you find out is there's more work that needs to get done, right? More clients means more work means, more everything. And so one of the everythings is people. And so at some point we hire somebody. They kind of help out. It's nice to not be the only one anymore. It's not perfect, but it's good enough. And then we hire another person. It's kind of the same thing. It's not perfect, but it's good enough. And at some point, and it's usually when you've hired a handful, right? So it's somewhere between 5 and 15 employees, depending on the type of employees and the industry and the type of leader. Somewhere in that stage, you cross the line into stage 3. And the reason you know that is because you're asking that question I mentioned earlier. What's wrong with these people? Right.
Right. Clearly, it is the people here, right?
Yeah, it's all their fault. Right. And so what's happened is you've hired, again, a handful of folks, and they don't act like you. They don't think like you. They don't take ownership like you do. They don't solve problems like you do, right? They're not as good at whatever it is as you are. They don't consult like it doesn't, whatever, like it's just not enough. And at the same time, they need to get paid. They expect to get paid. It's just crazy. And so
that's right.
You've hired them to do a job. They can't quite do the job. So you're having to manage them doing the job, which is the last thing that any founder has ever started a company to do, is manage other people.
Right.
And so you have to spend all this time managing them. So you don't have any time to get things done, but you have to get something done because you're usually the one responsible for selling the stuff that's actually going to pay all of that payroll. And so you wake up on a Monday morning, you've worked all weekend, right, to clean up some mess that somebody made. And you realize now I've got to have all my sales appointments for this week. And I've not had enough. So sales are lacking. So I've got to double what I was going to do. And you're just thinking like, what did I hire these folks for? And so we can solve that problem for folks here in a moment, but I just want to go through
Yeah, I was
the
gonna say let's
question.
pause in that moment of pain, because
Yeah.
that is it's like the valley of despair for founders in like early stage companies. It's just so difficult and painful
Yes.
to get through that, and just even acknowledging the fact that there is light at the end of the tunnel does feel somewhat hopeful.
Yeah. And there is, and so it's kind of like that old Green Day song, like you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. You
Yeah.
know, it's you don't have to. You actually don't have to scale past that, but you don't have to stay in it either. So an interesting point that I want to add here, and this comes up with my clients all the time. You may not have to build a business big enough to get to this stage, right? And take me for an example. I actually don't. I've scaled stuff, like that's cool. I know what it is. I teach people how to do it. I just don't want to do it. Like I want to do what I do. I want to spend most of my time in conversations like this or in coaching sessions with clients. And if I were to go build up and scale a business, I would have to spend less and less time with that because I'd have to manage other people and I'd have to spend more time in sales and business development to fuel the whole thing. Not forever, but for an extended season through stages 3 and 4. And it's just like, I don't need to check that box. Like that's not what I want for this business. I started this business to help other people achieve their visions, not to, get stuck in my own. And
It's
so,
a really important point though, Scott, which is there's so many people that believe that the only path forward is growth. It's
yeah.
like the only way to get through this is to grow, grow, grow. And I've just
Yeah,
heard,
and it's the whole if you're not growing, you're dying thing. And it's like, okay, like I agree with that in some sentiment, right? I think if we're not being challenged by something, especially as founders and visionaries, if we don't have a challenge ahead of us, that's dangerous territory for a founder.
yeah,
Like
then we're going to break something. Like
you want to see some
that's where we
bad
go.
life decisions? Yeah,
Right.
yeah, it's ugly.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that your revenue has to grow up. It doesn't mean that your head count especially has to go up. It doesn't mean that the complexity of your business has to go up. It doesn't mean you have to scale. There are so many different challenges that you can solve. There's so many different things that you can do to grow that aren't just growing your top line revenue.
Right.
And so we get that statement wrong if you're not growing, you're dying by thinking that the only way of measuring growth is revenue or profit, right? And the reality of it is it isn't. And so one of the very first things I do with my clients, especially in this reluctant manager stage and in the next one, which we'll talk about in a moment, is we get really clear on what is your vision for your company. Not the one you borrowed from some guy you're jealous of in your business group, not the one that you're trying to beat the company you were at in the past, not the one that you took from some, Instagram influencer. What's your desire for your business? Because if you don't know that and you're just growing for the sake of growth, the degree of reluctance, I'll go so far as to say resentment, even hatred. I have seen people hate their employees, right?
Right.
That they don't even need to hire in the first place.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's entirely unnecessary. So the reluctant manager thing is only and only ever worth it if it's necessary for you to grow to the size that you actually want to grow to as a company.
It's a
And
really
once
good point. So I'm just going to recap so far. We go through these stages, which is we decide that we want to do it. We're energized. There's got to be a better way to solve a problem. Then you go into pain, which is this is a little bit harder than I thought. And then what you're saying is if we start to hire people and bring people on, we'll go into even a little bit of a deeper pain, which is the
Yes.
reluctant manager. I don't know that I started this to be a manager. There's always the paradox of if I just do it, I can get it done. But teaching somebody's actually adding additional complexity to my work, which is like, oh, I'll just, move. I got this. Right.
Yep.
So But you're saying there is, light at the end of this tunnel. Please take us out of this valley of darkness. Help us move beyond these painful places that I seem to have been in a time or two, Scott.
So one of the things that you have to do in this stage, the biggest relief that you can bring, the greatest lever for scalability in that reluctant manager stage is to actually bring someone into the management circle with you, to bring on a great second in command. And we could do an entire show on what makes that possible, but knowing that that's the ticket out is really helpful. But it doesn't get you all the way out of the woods. So one of the things that happens is we gotta summon Tom Cruise for this bit here. So just a quick story. We've got our kids now I got to think about this because it's birthday season, but they're 13, 11, and 3. And so getting a babysitter a few years ago when they were 10, 8, and 0 was like impossible. It's like both of my boys are like hair on fire. It's crazy. And then we got this little baby that you have to keep
you got a baby who requires a little bit of attention as well.
And protection from the burning hair scene. It's not good.
Right.
So needless to say, my wife and I didn't have a whole lot of date nights, but we decided enough's enough. We're going to move heaven and earth. We're going to find someone. We got someone who was familiar with all of them, who was up for the challenge, got her all squared away, ordered pizza in for the kids. Like the toothbrushes were out. Everything was set. Right.
Yeah.
So we hand her off. We knew we were in good hands when she showed up with a Nerf gun in her hands, like ready to counteract the ambush that was awaiting.
I like the fact you set the expectations so low. It's like, look, you may or may not survive tonight. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. So she's there. We go off, and like in the peak of romance, we do dinner and a movie, right? It's the suburban dream. And so dinner at a chain nonetheless. So we have dinner. It's nice. We go to a movie, and it's Top Gun Maverick. And it's a cool movie. It's like all the references to the old one, like you got 80s music and Mach 9 planes. It's really cool. About probably 15, 20 minutes left in the movie, we get a call from the sitter. It's like SOS. You gotta come home. And I want to preface
was the house on fire?
Yeah, everyone was okay. The house was not on fire, but the boys were fighting downstairs, and the girl was not sleeping, and it was getting late. It was getting ugly. So we had to head home, and I missed the last 20 odd minutes of Top Gun Maverick. And having done this, I can tell you, if you stop the movie right there, it's downright depressing, right? It might as well be a tragedy. Like it's just everything that, he's been shot down, I think twice, or wrecked his plane twice. So he didn't get shot down the first time. He's having relational trouble with his wingman. He's not got the girl, the world is passing him by. His boss hates him. They're behind enemy lines getting chased by a helicopter. It's like, that doesn't usually end well. And if Tom stops in that moment and says, "Hey, is this all worth it?" It's like, it's not a good time to ask that question. And so what happens for a lot of founders is that they get their wingman, right? They get out of stage 3, the reluctant manager. There's some years of just fantastic growth. And it's hard fought. It's breathless sprint across the finish line, but it works. And during that time, there are these seemingly inconsequential moments that happen, right? Or consequential moments that have the opposite consequence that you thought. For example, we start to hit some of those milestones that we've been dreaming of for years, right? Our first $1 million of profit. And I remember one of my clients, he hit $1 million. And the very next thing he said to me after telling me, he's like, "We did it. We made $1 million in profit." He said, "Now I have to come up with a $400,000 tax bill." And
right.
We could do another episode on tax planning, right? So there's another thing there. But what you realize during this process as you're growing is the very, very hard truth that businesses get bigger, they do not get better. And so what you thought of as this kind of panacea of being a $10 million company, you get to the other side of the line and it's just like, this is the same as it was before. It's just worse. And it's just harder. And you can't say that, by the way, right? You tell your spouse that, or you tell your friend that, like, "Oh, leading a $10 million business is hard." Like, "Oh, first world problems, buddy." Right.
But there's a story that we tell ourselves at $1 million that, like, "Oh, I just need to get to 2.
Yes.
and it's going to be better. I just
Yeah.
need to get to 3. It's going to be better.
Yes.
Just follow the analogy of Top Gun, the second Top Gun, which is it's like that valley of death, the valley of
Yeah.
despair that you're in,
Yes.
just keeps kind of extending out. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
it's going to be the next milestone. It'll be the next
And
milestone.
it's exactly right. Because and in the movie, it's a great example of this. They completed the mission, right? But they didn't complete the mission because they got shut down in the process. So now they're behind enemy lines, and it's like we don't have the mission to fight for anymore.
Hmm.
And that's what a lot of founders feel is like the question at this stage is this it? Is this really what I sacrificed all of this for all these years for? Is this really what the trajectory looks like? The more we grow, the more miserable I feel inside. And you want to scale, right? It's like we wonder why we're not scaling. It's because that's the last thing in the world that you want.
Right.
Right. Intuitively, you know that if nothing changes and we scale, you will be dead in 5 years.
Yeah.
Like your physical frame can't even handle it. And so we fail to recognize the potential that's ahead of us because we actually lose sight of the vision, to some extent, if we had it at any stage. And so what happens is we go deep into this valley of despair, as you call it. It's called the disillusioned leader stage. And we feel like a failure because of it. I shouldn't feel this way. I shouldn't have these challenges. Our growth shouldn't be as hard to come by as it is. I should be a better leader. I should, and we should all over ourselves. And the reality of it is the next stage is not more of the same. The next stage is not another deeper step down into the valley. Just like for Tom Cruise, that last 15 minutes of the movie, which I did get to see like 2.5 years later.
I was going to say, you probably saw it on a plane.
Yeah.
Like you just
No, I didn't see it on a plane. I saw it because it came out on whatever Paramount or something like that. So I was able to watch it at home. Like I think it still took me 3 times because it's like by the time I get everyone down and to bed, it's like I got 5 minutes before I'm out. But anyway,
you had to watch this series of 5 minutes, which is another terrible way.
And this is the thing that I want, especially those who are in this disillusioned leader stage, who are just frustrated at every turn, is it gets so much better. You're right on the cusp of the single biggest transformation in your entire journey as a founder. And it's that move from that disillusioned leader to what I call CEO. It's where you finally get to use the title that's been on your business card since before you started the whole thing. But you actually step into that role.
Most of us have founder and CEO. The reality is we're not CEOs. We're founders up until the stage where you're like, okay, there's a reason why there are people that are professional operators that come in and take over companies where founders need to get the heck out of the way, right?
Yeah. If they want to stay founders, right? And so this is where, again, we go back to what is your vision for the company? Because if your vision for the company is to kind of fly your founder freak flag, then more power to you. Go do it, but make sure you throttle the size of your company to a state that you can do that effectively. If not, you're just going to go deeper and deeper into that stage. And you're going to start to believe the lie that that's all there is for you, right? You're going to start to believe the lie that you have to get out of the way. You do have to get out of the way, but that doesn't mean you need to leave. It may just mean you need to embrace this new role that's ahead of you. And that's scary for a lot of founders because it's very, very different. That week looks very, very different. The value we bring to our team looks very, very different. The degree of direct control we have over our company is very, very different. And every single one of those things scares every single founder out there until they do it.
So I think that just to recap this, so like what you've just said, you go through these series of questions. Where we land is a place where it's going. You've traded. I love what you said, which is a bigger company does not mean better company. It's just bigger. You're trading the size of your problems, and even the number of your problems will increase the size of your company. And you get to this point, and the answer then is what you're suggesting is we become CEOs. Yes. We have to leave that. Our behaviors, maybe not the identity behind, but the behaviors of what it took us to get to this point and take on the behaviors of being a CEO. Is that, did I recap? Fairly
Yeah, you
well.
want to move from being a visionary founder to being a visionary CEO. We don't want you to lose your visionariness, right? We don't want you to lose that spirit and that spark. We just want you to be able to deploy it properly. We want to get your hands out of the stuff that keeps burning your fingers, right? And there's some mindset changes that have to happen. There's some behavior and habit changes that need to happen. But I mean, I get the opportunity to teach this all over the country, and oftentimes in groups that have some folks that are still in stage 4 and they're feeling it, and other folks who've been to stage 5, 6, 7 in the process. And to a T, every single one of them will say, yes, like it does get better. It's amazing when you embrace that role. But so many of us sell ourselves short. We buy the lie that someone else has to be CEO of our company. We buy the lie that this is as good as it gets. We buy the lie that this is as far as we can take it, and it's not. It's just as far as you can take it with your current set of strategies.
Got it. All right. So obviously you do this in depth for founders, but just give us the high level stuff. So if I need to make this transition, I reached this point, I've gone through these multiple valleys of despair, I think. And if the answer then becomes, I need to transition to being a CEO, what does that look like? How do I start to actually do that?
It's a funny thing to be chief executive. What is the one thing that you need?
I
Other
mean,
executives,
yeah, I was gonna say,
right?
like, people around you,
Yeah.
minions. You
You
need,
can't, yeah, you can't be the chief executive if there are no other executives. And so usually what's happening at this stage is we have leaders inside of our company, right? This is true for nonprofits as well. We have folks that are in leadership roles. But if you say, hey, are they like executive caliber? Even if you don't define that for someone, you just ask them that question. They're like, no, not at all. Like maybe one or two, but most of them aren't. And that's nothing against those people. Those are beautiful, wonderful people who are absolutely essential. You try and get a bunch of executives to get something off the ground, it's never going to happen. But you need to surround yourself with a different caliber of leader. You need to build an executive team. And that's going to mean you need to change how you lead so that you can lead executives, because executives don't want to be led the same way as the kind of water carrying leaders that you've had to date. They don't want to be told what to do. They want to be given a vision. They want to know what results are expected, and they want to be given freedom and autonomy to do that and execute it well. And so we have to recognize that to be chief executive, we have to have executives. And to do that, we're going to have to change a lot about the way we show up as leaders to make space and entice them in, to attract executives and to really get the best out of them.
it's
And
such a
usually,
big point there,
yeah,
but just to press on it just briefly, which is there is a group of people that you need, call them generalists, but just more of those startup type people. Almost everybody that I know that have gone through this stage, what you're talking about, is when they bring in executives, it is incredibly painful
yeah,
because oftentimes the people that are sitting in particular job roles are not the people that you need to go to the next stage.
yes,
And so in many cases, you're firing or laying off or demoting the people that sat next to you when you were three people on a pizza.
yeah.
It's a challenging time.
Yeah, godfather of your children stuff, right? Like
Right.
I mean, many times, like your cousin, your brother, your nephew, your wife, right? I've seen husband and
Right.
wife teams struggle
Oh
with this
man,
dynamic.
yeah.
It's
Terrible.
it's huge. It's huge, and so there's this huge relational element to it. And again, this goes back to no one's going to go through that relational conflict just for more profit, right? I mean, not really. Yeah, like there's just at least not many of the ones that I work with, and so to build a bigger company, but to and like threaten, not lose, because you don't actually have to lose the relationships, but to threaten those relationships, especially in the short term, there has to be a mission that's bigger than just being bigger. And so that vision piece again is so huge. The only reason it's worth doing that is if those people are actually preventing the organization. We're not even talking about you at this point, but the organization from achieving its mission. Right? Then you can have the conviction. Then you can get, the support of the rest of the team and everybody else behind us, because hey, this is not just, Scott doesn't like Jim. This is We've asked a lot of Jim for a lot of years, and we can't, it's not right to ask more of him. Right? So there's all kinds of ways that you express your humanity appropriately in this situation, but not doing anything isn't one of them.
I think that's the key point. And the realization as a founder that you've created this thing, and it was of and because of your brain and your hard work and the people around the table and the team and all this incredible amounts of energy and passion. But this thing needs something different. And it wants to be something different. And perhaps the people around the table that got it to this point are not the people that you need to get it to the next point.
Exactly. And don't get me wrong, some of them are, right? Some, if they want to evolve, if they're on board with that, some of those people can make the leap. It's not uncommon, but it's not all of them, right? I've never seen a team. I've done this a whole lot of times, as you mentioned in the intro, and I've never seen a team that it was everybody. It's about a third of your leaders can't make the leap. Sometimes it's a little more, sometimes it's a little less, but as a general rule of thumb, you're going to see some significant churn at the leadership level.
Also, I think you just need to ask too. You need to say, "Hey, look, guys,
is it what you
is
want?
The job to be done. Do you want to do this?"
Yes,
because you're the pirate, and it was amazing. We were pirates together. We were slashing and burning, and jumping on other ships, etc. And what we're getting into now is not going to be as much fun.
Yeah. It's totally, it's funny. We call the stage that you were talking about the fun stage for that exact reason. And we're just not, it's like, we're not in Kansas anymore. We're not in fun anymore. Right. We're headed to predictable success. We're headed to tremendous growth and scalability and individual and organizational reward for that. But we've got to change how we show up. And some people want to make that leap and others do not. And the worst thing that you can do as a human and a founder CEO is to ask them to make that leap when they don't want to. That's really, really painful. And
I want to just ask one
would.
other question though, just before we sort of, put a wrapper on this part of the conversation, which is there are moments when I might not want to do that as a founder. And as you go through and it's like, look, okay, maybe we've had vision drift and I want to realign on the vision. I want to really see that, but I've built something that I no longer want to be a part of.
Yeah.
Is that, I know it's not common.
That's very common. Again, like that's a big part of, is this it? It's like the only reason I show up here is because I own the place. And if I didn't, like my only asset in life would disappear. It's like, you feel like you are stuck between a rock and a hard place. And again, that's why it's why it's so important and why we have to start with vision, because you have to define what it is you actually want, because it's not $10 million in revenue. Nobody actually wants that.
Right. You think you do, but you don't.
Yeah.
No, that's it.
Now, it might be the impact that you can create with $10 million in revenue. It might be the career opportunities that you can create for your team at $50 million of revenue. It might be the exit that you want that'll, set you and your leaders up for the rest of their life. Like there are lots of noble reasons for having big companies. Don't get me wrong. I'm all for scaling. I'm all for scaling for the right reasons. Right. And just a number isn't compelling enough to do it. It's not compelling enough for you, which is why you're stuck in stage 4. And it's definitely not compelling enough for your leaders who are following you into it.
And just because you are on this path does not mean you should continue the path. Just because a company is growing. Okay.
Just like on a plane, sometimes the closest exit is behind you.
Yeah, wow, that's a pretty profound one as well. All right, so the question then is just to kind of start to wrap this up. So I know that I've got to go through these stages, and I now know the answer. Bring in a second, make sure that I am outlining we're now creating a sustainable organization, and I need to transition to being a CEO. I just want to ask, what behaviors are going to be different for me? And again, I know it's really complicated. I know that's the work that you do, but just give me an outline to say, how am I spending my time differently after I get to this stage than I was before?
Let me give you 2 filters. The first one is you shouldn't be working on anything that's necessary for this year's goals.
That's a really profound statement.
Yeah. So it was like, well, what do I do with my hands? Like a Ricky Bobby moment. It's like, I have no idea what to do.
Yeah.
Like, I'm used to driving the
Right.
sales team for this month's revenue target. What are you talking about? I'm talking about, as chief executive, you need to be thinking 2 and 3 and 5 and 10 years down the road. And so you should be working on things that affect 2 and 5 and 10 years down the road. Now, they'll have immediate consequences, don't get me wrong, but you need to be thinking about the next CFO that you're going to hire. You need to be thinking of the building that you're going to have to acquire a year or two from now. You need to be thinking about the product lines you're going to have to expand to be able to hit the revenue targets you've set for 3 years out. Because if you're not thinking about it, who is? Nobody in your business can think longer than you and do anything about it.
It's a great point. But talk to me just a little bit about, there's two places that always pop into my head in this stage. And the first one is people, and how important hiring becomes in this stage. And then the second is this weird thing called culture, which, but a CEO, Peter Drucker famously says, culture will eat strategy for lunch. Those, how do I think about that as a founder, or now as I'm transitioning to the CEO role?
Yeah. Culture is tough because it means so many different things to so many people. And again, we could do an entire episode series on culture, but
I think we
I want to
do, Scott. Like, I think we just fire Anthony. Like,
I'm in. I'll change my name to Anthony. So no, what I would say is, here's the best way for me for culture. Culture is, how do we make sure that the actions that everybody takes all day, every day, align with our mission, vision, values as a company? That's culture. Because it's not the words on the wall. It's not the vision statement that you have plastered on your website. It's not, something in a performance assessment process and performance assessments that never happen. It's, how do we translate this mission, vision, values, this thing that we're going after, into the things that we actually do all day, every day? That's what drives culture inside of an organization. Now, at this scale, there's some really specific things that are happening in that it's not enough to just say, here's our values, go do them. We actually have to set goals that align with those values. We need to establish strategies that move us toward those goals. And we have to be specific in the tactics that are necessary to do that. So there's a whole chain of events that lead from that action to that mission, vision, values. You can't just ask people to span the whole gap in between. The second point I was going to make earlier, and it ties to this question, and that is that your job as a CEO is to make people decisions, not policy decisions. It's not your
a big
job.
One, because I want to get in the weeds.
It's not your job to be chief decision maker. That's not what CEO is. Your job is to make sure that you build a decision making team. That's what an executive team is. And so that moves us out of, I have to be the best and understand the most of everybody thing, which hasn't been true in a really long time, and allows us to say, hey, I don't have to be the best at anything other than making sure that we're the best. And so coaching and mentoring and having tough accountability conversations with your executive team becomes some of the most important things that you could possibly do. Things that you would have gladly delegated or ignored altogether now become the way that you create the success that you want. So people decisions, not policy decisions, is a total 180 on how to lead. But if you're looking for the freedom and autonomy, if you're looking for the scalability, if you're looking for just the peace of enjoying showing up to work every day, I've not found any other way to do it at scale.
I think it's a unbelievable conversation. And to your point, we could go on, without Anthony interrupting us, and asking dumb questions. We could just go on for a long time being really smart and, just not having to, do that. I love it when Anthony's not here. It's great. All right. So let's go into the speed round. We're gonna, ready? I love that. So I love that an abnormal amount. We just got that graphic done. I think it's hilarious. All right. So we're going to ask a couple of questions. Just go through quickly, react, give me your gut feel. So building systems or building relationships in this time as you're transitioning. Obviously, you just said once you're beyond it. But to get there, is it people or is it systems?
Systems.
Hire for culture or skills? Give me two answers to that. Number one, before you get to the pivot into CEO, and then afterwards.
Hire people that you trust would be the culture piece. I would just say it a little bit different. When you're looking for executives, one of the things that separates them from the generalist leader is a specific skill set, both as an executive and in whatever function they do, right? You don't want to be the most financially astute person in your company. That's a scary place to be. So I would say there's a big shift. I don't think culture ever goes away, but I do think the skill set needed becomes much more, co-equal at this stage.
So we didn't talk about this. Where do you stand on having board, having advisors? Who do I need around me as advisors or board of directors before I get to this stage? Who do I need afterwards?
That's a great question. In the book, we actually talk at each stage who you want around you. So I won't bore everybody with that. They can get it in the book. I will say that I'm actually somewhat anti-coach early in the process, stage one in particular. There's some things that are helpful for coaching, but it's very, very specific. And I actually see more damage from coaches than good in stage one. As you progress, and once you get to where you're trying to get to stage 5, I would never attempt that without a coach. There's just too many blind spots. There's too many pitfalls. There's too many ways that it can knock you out of line. So I would say there's a spectrum to when coaching is helpful and what types of coaching are helpful. And again, we go through that in the book, so folks can get a little more detail on that. In terms of advisors, I love having advisors around. I think we've had folks on our show that talk about a personal board of advisors. And I think it's brilliant. I think it's a great, great idea at any stage. Having someone who is outside of your sphere of everyone thinks I'm amazing because I'm their boss and they have to is a great, great thing.
Better to delegate key responsibilities early and then try to move out of those, or wait till you move into this next transition to really truly delegate?
It depends on what they are. There's a right and wrong progression to delegation. If your idea of delegation is letting go, that's not a good progression. If your idea is empowering others and then holding them accountable, excellent. In general, I recommend getting rid of your administrative stuff to, kind of outsiders as quickly as possible. That could be fractional CFO, it could be a bookkeeper, it could be a virtual assistant. Get that stuff off. There's very little you're going to gain from it. And then what that leaves is kind of revenue responsibilities and fulfillment responsibilities is kind of the two big buckets that we have to play in. And it's generally better to delegate the key duties for fulfillment before you do revenue. So when you bring in that second in command, delegating fulfillment so that you can run with the sales side of things longer tends to be highly productive.
I love it. I'm here. My takeaway, there's just a ton for the show, but the takeaways is remember that there's every stage of the journey. There's different questions you need to ask yourselves as you're going through this ultimate stage. Remember that bigger is not always better. And it requires you to really clearly refocus on your why, what your vision is for your success, and what your vision is for your life is, and decide whether or not the company and what you've built aligns with that purpose and process. I love that we call them the nasty shoulds. You're going to go through a lot of shoulds. I should be doing this. I should be doing this. I should be doing this. And the reality is that some of those probably are not true. Any other big ideas that I missed along the way, Scott, just for the takeaways?
Yeah, not one that you missed, but one that we would be amiss to not share. And that is that joy never comes from the destination, right? That's the real thing underlying all of this. It always comes from the journey. And one of the biggest tragedies that comes alongside a knowledge of the stages is the temptation to pursue the next stage and think that everything will be okay then. And the reality of it is that, and this is a lesson I learned from outside the business world, and that is we actually, our third child, our daughter, was born and passed away a month later. And one of the things that I learned from that short span of her life was to savor every moment of the journey. It was not an easy month. She was in the NICU the whole time. There's every reason to kind of run from it. But I have the fortune now of saying I ran into it. And so embracing every stage for whatever the stage is, there's actually a very specific gift that's available. There's something joyful about every stage, no matter how deep in that valley it is, that you won't get in later stages. And if you miss it now, you'll miss it forever. And so
It is funny that we oftentimes look back at those painful times like that. Well, that was the fun time.
yeah,
I mean, that was
yeah,
not the fun time. That was the fun
yeah,
time. But in it, you're just, hair feels like you're on
yeah.
fire.
That's exactly
Deep
right.
dive recommendations. I've got a few. Built to Last by Jim Collins, obviously a terrific book. There's a good book called Let Go to Grow by Doug Tatum. Article called The Founder's Dilemma by Noam Wasserman in the Harvard Business Review. And there's a podcast from Founder to CEO. And that's by Todd Uderstedt episode. It's the 3 phases of founder evolution. Where can we find your book? Where can we find what else? Your book is obviously would be important in this phase, but what else do you pay attention to as far as interesting articles you've read? And then tell us where we can connect with you and find your stuff.
Yeah. So they can get a copy of the book at scalearchitects.com/founders. It is absolutely free for everyone. So head on over there, get a copy of it. It'll take you through all 7 stages, give you the joy for each stage. If you're feeling a little down, you can jump right to the end of the chapter and get that. It's just a great, great guide. I'll tell you the 2 or 3 things you need to focus on so you can let go of 20 or 30 others. Feedback from folks who've read the book, they're saving 9, 10, 15 hours a week on stuff that they did not have to do within the first month or so. So it's really, really cool. In terms of other things, I'm actually on this kind of nerding out kick of looking at sports science and what we've learned in sports science and how that applies to organizational dynamics. And they are a near 1-to-1 ratio. So some fascinating stuff. If you look at, if you head over to our podcast, Secrets of the High Demand Coach, we had a gentleman on, I believe it was Lee Povey. I could be getting that wrong. That would be terrible. But we do a mashup of that. It's super, super cool. And he is just brilliant at it. Did both. He trained Olympic athletes and founders. Super cool.
Wow.
In terms of just real quick, couple of books that changed my life are the Predictable Success by a friend of mine, Les McEwen, which is great for this journey. And then another more recent from another friend of mine named Benj Miller called Renegades. Fantastic books.
Love them. Great recommendations. And to find you, connect with you via LinkedIn, go to the website.
Yeah, I'm on all of them. I wish it was as easy as saying, go find Scott Ritzheimer, but I'm a junior. So take the better looking younger one and you'll have the right guy. Or go to scalearchitects.com. You'll find everything you need there.
Beautiful. Awesome. Thank you, Scott. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to what is clearly the best episode we've ever done because Anthony is not here and not here to ruin it. We're not going to do a podcast on Tuesday, but coming up, we're going to do one on Thursday. It's a little spicy, Scott, which is, do politics or religion belong in your company? Which is, I've got opinions. I think the answer is
I'm
no.
glad I'm not here for that one.
Yeah, exactly. Visit us on howtofounder.com. Follow on your favorite channel. Please leave us a review. Talk about how much better this is without it. No, don't do that. That maybe I don't know. No, don't do that. That would be terrible. But leave us a review if you liked it. Really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day. Scott, thank you again so much for joining us today.
Chris, thanks for having me.